stay away from sexual temptation. This is something that Paul speaks of in two different places, very specifically. 1 Corinthians 6:18, he says, flee from sexual immorality. Stay away from it. He tells Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:22, flee also youthful lusts. That attraction is especially powerful when you are young. He says this, every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. That was from Corinthians. 2 Timothy, he says, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. So it's not just that we need to stay away from that seductress or seducer, whether it's a man or a woman, but we need to flee from any kind of situation that might compromise our sexual integrity. And there are plenty of seductresses out there today. Prostitution is just one that might be in view here. But we have, it seems, gone to great lengths to streamline the business of prostitution today. There are streamlined websites today where women can prostitute themselves. And we know that pornography is such a horrendous problem in our culture. Some examples of just general temptation. Things to look out for. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go, I just went out on a date with my girlfriend. Let's just go up to her apartment just for a little bit and have a drink or watch a movie together alone in her apartment. Or maybe you are at work and you like to have, maybe a lady at work likes to have lunch with a man at work who is easy to talk to and she can talk to about anything, and he's just so understanding of all of your problems. Or maybe it's connecting with that old boyfriend or old girlfriend on Facebook. Or maybe it's surfing the internet alone late at night. These are all examples of temptation that we need to flee from. We need to stay away from these types of things. When it comes to dating, and here's just some examples of fleeing, of avoiding the temptation. If you're dating, date in public places. There's no reason to be alone together when you're not married. Bring along a chaperone. That's a good idea. If you're young, you can bring along a friend, a sister, or brother. If you're at work, make sure you set boundaries in your relationships when it comes to men and women. Billy Graham is famous for having his, did they just call it the Billy Graham rule? I can't remember what they called it. But he had a rule. He wasn't going to be alone with a woman. And he would always either have somebody with him, another person with him, in private counseling or whatever it might be, or just speak in public. And the same thing is important in a work setting. I actually brought this up in a work setting, that this was something that I was concerned about, and somebody got really, really mad at me. And you know what? Fine, you can be mad. My marriage and my integrity is much more important than whatever it is that you're concerned about. When it comes to marriage, transparency in marriage, having access to each other's phones and computers and internet accounts, Facebook accounts. Sometimes I've seen couples, they share a Facebook account. That's a wise idea. Some old girlfriend decides to private message you. Guess who sees it? Yeah. And then one of the things I always recommend, especially to parents, but I think it's good for any family, when it comes to the internet. We have access to the whole internet here on these things. And there are lots of great things and lots of horrific things. And there's software that you can install that can help keep people accountable, block certain things, specifically pornography. Let's go on to verse 9. And here, he's getting into, this is the cost of what will happen if you give in to this temptation. Verse 9, lest you give your honor to others, and your years to the cruel one. You'll lose your honor. You know, it takes years to build respect and a name for yourself among your own family, among your church, among your community. And all it takes is one event, one falling to temptation, and that respect, that name that you've built for yourself can be soiled. Verse 10, lest aliens be filled with your wealth and your labors go to the house of a foreigner. He's talking here about loss of wealth. You lose money. And your money will go not to your family, not even to your friends. It'll go to strangers. I think we have gone house shopping over the years. So the last 20 years, we've gone house shopping at different points in our lives. And I remember at least 2 times finding a house and finding out, I think we actually put an offer on a house once. And, we tried to, we put an offer below the asking price. And we found out there was this dispute because what had happened? A man and a woman, they were going through divorce. And I don't know why. Maybe it wasn't sexual immorality, but it's very common that is the reason. Very common. And so, they're selling a house, and they're having a fight about, we sell it for this or whatever. And a lot of times you lose money in those types of deals. Losing homes, having to pay alimony, child support, garnishing of wages. Sometimes even medical treatments are involved. And that, I think, gets to verse 11. Verse 11 says this, and you mourn at last when your flesh and your body are consumed. Your flesh and your body are consumed. In what way? Well, I think one of the most obvious ways, and we see this today, is we have venereal diseases. We have diseases that you can really only get if you commit sexual immorality. In fact, I just read that I can't remember exactly the statistics, but it's pretty shocking that at any point in time, about 20% of the populace of our country have, at that time, some kind of STD, sexually transmitted disease. And then, of course, the stress that comes from the shame or maybe the heartache of sexual immorality, those have impacts not just on your mental state, but on your body as well. And then sometimes, and this is in more rare occasions, but I think about the times where sexual immorality leads to fits of rage and sometimes leads even to murder. I think about the famous O.J. Simpson trial where that seemed to be the situation. O.J. Simpson, his wife, seemingly having some kind of tryst with somebody else. And then sometimes it leads to not just our own death, but sometimes the death of others, especially when it comes to trying to hide the sin, trying to hide the infidelity. We think about King David, right? And this is something that happened with King David. Today, I think the most common scenario is we use abortion violence as a way to hide infidelity. In fact, maybe 10 years ago, we were living in Augusta, Georgia, and I had I can't remember if it was on the weekends or whatever, would go to the local abortion clinic and try to minister, try to stand out and plead for the lives of little baby boys and girls. And there was a woman, she was sitting in her car, and I was pleading with her. She was on the phone with somebody, but for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And finally she got out, and she stood right in front of me. And she said to me, you know what, you don't understand. And I expected to hear, I don't have enough money, or, I don't know who the father is, or whatever, something like that. But here's what she told me. She said, you don't understand. I am engaged to be married to a man, and this is not his baby. That's what she told me. And she turned around and she walked in there to try to get rid of the evidence. so that she could live the rest of her life as a lie, pretending to be faithful, but in reality not being so. And do we think that those things will never be found out? We tend to, don't we? Think that our sin will never be found out. Of course, God knows.